Hello, everybody. This is Matt McQueenie, and with me is Camruz Jaman and Hugo Santos. We're all of Conabos, and we are here to talk about the exciting new release of Sitecore 10.2. Cam and Hugo will get deeper into the technical parts than I can, but the one thing that really stuck out to me is that when I look at what's new in Sitecore 10.1 and what's new in Sitecore 10.2, it goes from 0 mentions of this magical word headless to about 10. It seems to be more of a technical release, less so on kind of the marketing, automation, personalization, all the things that were the buzzwords kind of before. Cam, why don't we start with you? Was that something that really stuck out to you, this headless piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from previous releases, we're used to Sitecore releasing big bang releases, heavily packed features around, especially around the marketing and analytics features. But this one seems to be very much geared around Sitecore's transition to headless. Let's say, yeah.
And Hugo, you were looking over this as most MVPs do, right? When you got your early release, was that something that stuck out to you as well? Did it kind of come out of nowhere? Did it seem normal to you?
Exactly. So if we take at the first glance, I mean, from an XP perspective at least, you won't see anything much visually different. But when it comes to time to analyze them, the release notes and etc., we're going to see that most of the big things are somehow related to headless. So that's definitely something that they should be focused on right now.
Cam, why is Sitecore making this move to headless? I mean, we just saw the um, their annual conference on a lot of the updates. What is behind this move?
The move is necessitated by just the industry. The industry is moving towards headless systems and the Composable DXP, the Composable Digital Experience Platform. People are picking headless solutions to fill the needs that they have and bringing together pieces of their marketing stack to fulfill their specific marketing needs. And Sitecore themselves have been trying to get onto a cloud or a SaaS system for a while. And I think they've been trying a few things and they haven't quite got there. And I think the acquisitions over the past few months, particularly, shows Sitecore's seriousness in this move towards headless and the composable stack.
That's great. So we're going to go into a lot of the features, but the one piece I wanted to ask, which I'm interested as a somewhat technical person, but not as technical as you two, is there a threshold from which something goes from to headless? From, is it headful? I don't but what is there a threshold basically where you can kind of say, all right, it's now headless, and what are some of those considerations?
I don't think there's a specific technical threshold. Would you say, Hugo? I think it
No, it's
probably depends on
yeah.
each
In my
industry.
opinion, it's more about the visualization of the project, how you are analyzing the entire big picture. If you are actually talking about microservices and using different providers for different purposes, instead of using one big thing to fix all these problems that you have, you are probably headless project. Otherwise, you're still on the old school projects.
Yeah. And I think from a cycle perspective, and like traditionally headless was, a separate content is very separate from how that content is then consumed. Whereas with Sitecore, they've both traditionally lived together. So the content and the presentation is merged together in order to give you the final product. Because if you think about it from a content perspective, the way it's used isn't always going to be the same. Sometimes it's going to be used on the web, and sometimes it's going to be used in a mobile app, and sometimes it might be used to drive other things such as your marketing campaigns. So I think it does depend on each company's definition almost. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a pure definition of what headless is, and each company will try to redefine it to meet their own goals.
That's great. So we will start with Hugo because one of the big updates, if you will, is that Azure Search has been deprecated. Correct, Hugo? Could you talk a little bit about what this means?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So, as you guys may know, starting on Sitecore 10.0, Azure Search was marked as deprecated. So Sitecore was basically telling us that you guys should no longer be using that for some reason. We know that back in the days, Azure Search kind of made sense for us, but quickly we realized that it has a lot of limitations from technical perspective. So you have number of fields limitation, you may have number of indexes limitations, and the cost is not that optimized. So with all those limitations and be a little bit pricey, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. So what Sitecore is basically doing is telling us to get back to Solr. You still want to use Azure for most of our things. So your site is probably going to be hosted on Azure. You can have your Solr hosted somewhere. You should not be using, of course, the same server for everything, but instead of using the Azure Search, use a hosted Solr solution. You can host your Solr yourself, or you can pick up a solution such as SearchStacks, which is out there. They have a managed Solr solution that you can use. You can basically consume the APIs and just forget about everything when it comes to maintaining your Solr, which is awesome, by the way. But from now on, starting on Sitecore 10.2, instead of just being deprecated, Azure Search is gone. You cannot use that at all. So if you're starting a new project on Sitecore 10.2, Azure Search is no longer an option. You're going to have to use Solr, at least for the internal indexes.
Hugo, let me ask you one piece on this, actually, a little more general. What does headless mean to Search? Because the way you're speaking about Search in general feels kind of microservice-y already. Is Search kind of headless already?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a website which is headless, it is still a website, right? So it's going to require some sort of search. We can talk about internal search. That's going to depend a lot on the tool. So Sitecore will somehow offer the internal search for the headless in the future. But if you're talking about your website search built on a headless way, you're going to find a way to present the content, the search, and then to index the content, the search. The way that you are presenting depends a lot on how you are building your UI. So you may be using some sort of libs, React, Angular, Vue.js, anything, and your search is going to be built on that. But your search is going to be consuming some sort of APIs to perform the queries, right? If we're talking about Solr, for instance, that's cool because Solr, they offer some APIs that can be used to consume the search, but then you got to think about how you are indexing your content now. If you're using Sitecore, you still have to install Solr and consume Sitecore in order to have those items indexed on Solr. And then you can kind of build your search page using some sort of React libs or anything like that to consume those Solr APIs. But the entire structure is going to be pretty much the same, Matt.
That's great. And then
I think the neat thing as well, if you're using something like SearchStacks, is you can use Search Studio for SearchStacks, and then you can use that in a headless way because your CM server would just index the data and push that out to SearchStacks, and then your front end hosted in a Jamstack kind of way can use Search Studio to actually present search results.
That's going to accelerate a lot the development because you don't need to worry about the UI part. So all the UI components are going to be there, consuming the APIs and actually handling the JSON formats already. But you also have a lot of things that comes with, right? So you have all the analytics events being sent to their analytics platform, and then you can consume those in form of some sort of dashboard. So yeah, it's a win-win for sure.
Yeah.
And then Cam, did you want to speak to the update center?
The update center has been deprecated, but it's one of these features that nobody has ever used, so nobody's really gonna miss that one, I don't think.
The tree fell in the forest.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't we get into Experience Platform and Experience Manager? Did you want to take that, Cam?
Hugo can jump into that one, I think.
Yeah, I can help. So few points here, Matt. The first one, the modules, at least the internal Sitecore modules, are now released on a different manner. So instead of using resource files and database items, they are now released using resource files only. So no more databases for those modules, which probably is going to be a good thing, especially for upgrades, right, Cam?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll make it much easier for upgrades, and almost a shame they got rid of the update center, because that would have made it a lot easier.
True. I mean, I did server and publishing servers are now using the .NET Core 3.1 new version, also positive. Still somehow related to search. So when using Sitecore 10.2, please make sure that you're using the new Solr version. So back in the days used to be Sitecore Solr 8.4.0. Now the official release recommends to use 8.8.2. I've performed some tests myself with 8.4.0 just in case. It looks like it is still somehow compatible, but if you're starting a new project, please, I highly recommend to use the new version just in case. You won't harm. It's going to be perfect.
And I think with Sitecore having deprecated Azure Search as well, it will mean that they can start to take advantage of some of those Solr specific features. So maybe this is one of the reasons they deprecated those. And we know Solr is adding a lot of features in the background itself, right? So that could be a net positive in the future.
Yeah.
So when we see the numerous bug fixes, are there any that really kind of stand out?
They're just regular kind of bug fixes, I'd say. Tickets that have been raised with Sitecore support. Nothing that particularly stood out, but it means that if you're on an earlier version and then you've got a bunch of support fixes added to your solution, you can remove those and clean your solution up.
Yeah.
Great.
There is also one new thing, Matt. This async processor mode is still experimental, so it is disabled by default. But if you want to try, just to kind of start understanding how it works, you have your pipeline composed by multiple processors. Back in the days before this version used to be execute A, execute B, execute C in an order. From now on, you can have them executed in an async mode. So basically, you can have them executed randomly. You execute A, you do not wait until it's finished to execute B, and when it's finished, you can execute the others. You gotta play with it. Sounds interesting, to be honest, but Sitecore will advise that it is still experimental. So if I don't use it on production, just be careful.
It should be interesting. I think it should, in theory, improve the startup times, and we know Sitecore is slow when you after a deployment, for example. So that could be an interesting experimental addition.
Definitely.
All right. So next up, we have analysis and reporting. And here we have effective personalization on individual goal conversions as the big call out here.
Yes, this is more like a visual improvement. So now they are exposing the results of those goal conversions on a personalization manner. So it's positive, especially for the marketers out there. You're going to have more information when analyzing the campaigns and goal conversions, specifically when using personalization.
Great. And then it looks like there's a handful of other nice bullets here. Is there any items we want to talk a bit more on with these?
They are all. Go ahead, Cam.
Yeah, I think the big one to call out here is the data purge, right, Hugo?
Yeah, definitely. So in the release space, that's usually translated on more performance, which is always good. So might be interesting as well. You can now clean up the interactions. Still gotta make sure that this is working as expected, but at least from a bullet point perspective, it looks interesting.
Yeah, and I think just clean up those databases because those XConnect databases can get big, and sometimes if you've been running XConnect for a long time, you have data which is 3, 4, 5 years old, which might not always make sense for your current interactions, because it's just depends on your business, of course, right? But it might not make sense for your current interactions in order for the goals and any kind of cross promotion that you might want to do. Yeah, there's a few other changes, right? Some internal logging. I think being able to disable robot detection could be useful for load and stress testing your website. I don't think you'd normally want to disable that for regular websites, right?
And then next up, we have the Horizon and the Content Explorer. I know I have a lot of headless on my brain, but Cam, did you say before we came on that there was something that had to do with headless with this?
Not directly, but so this is new Content Explorer mode, and it allows you to view all of the content in your site in a kind of tabular kind of manner. But what really stuck out to me was this is how most headless systems have their content laid out, right? In a kind of tabular fashion, and then what you use the search filters to narrow down the specific piece of content that you're looking for. Whereas Sitecore has traditionally been running in the tree view mode, so it's much more geared towards a hierarchical content structure. So it's interesting to see them release this, but it feels like this is edging towards that headless, the way that all the headless content has been traditionally surfaced. So again, it's bridging this gap, right?
Can I ask you one thing, Cam? Why is this supposed to be better than the old way?
This view or Horizon in general?
The Content Explorer being in tab mode instead of being hierarchical.
I think it's just being able to find content, right? So if you have a lot of content in your website, being able to quickly find the piece of content or the page that you want to edit is very important. And that's what it comes down to. It's just a way of surfacing and being able to get to the piece of content that you want to edit. And once you're here, you can switch between this Content Explorer mode and then the page editing mode, and then into a content mode as well. So if you want to just have that regular content editor view for editing the fields directly, but it really just comes down to being able to quickly get to the piece of content that you want to get to.
Okay.
And actually, on that point too, is it because you can search better in this mode, or is it a different consideration?
It's entirely search driven, right?
Yeah.
It's entirely search driven. You can see from here that they have they have these options for like the templates and the workflow states and created by, etc. I'm sure you can add custom filters to that. Knowing Sitecore, you usually can, but it's entirely search driven. Yeah.
Great. And then I know there's some additional improvements as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of little changes in here. Being able to navigate the component hierarchy in the editing mode, in the inline editing mode. It's very, very minor, but this is something that's always been there in the Sitecore, even back to the old page editor mode, and obviously the experience editor. And the workflow is also now surfaced directly out of Horizon. So it means you need to leave this editing interface much less frequently.
Great. And then if we move on to SXA, I see our first slide is integration with Horizon with an exclamation point. What do we owe that?
Nicely transitioning on. SXA had no compatibility with Horizon in the previous release, or very little compatibility. So it now has full compatibility with SXA. It's a big deal because SXA simplifies your development. It speeds up time to market. So now having integration with Horizon is a pretty big deal. It will probably mean a lot of people can upgrade to this version and not worry about loss of functionality, for example. But Horizon itself, it's a much more modern interface compared to Experience Editor. It's much more quick. It's much more snappy. You have various modes in Horizon. We should do a video on just Horizon alone. It has being able to switch from the visual editor to content editor to being able to view the analytics on a page, it's much quicker. It's very modern. You can switch between desktop, tablet, mobile view, all within the same interface. So that's why it is a big deal, and having full support for SXA will mean that it will be a good selling point for a lot of upgrades.
Great. And then I also see there's Bootstrap 5.0 support. It's Scriven, right?
Scriven, yeah.
Potato.
Yeah.
Then we also have easier centralization of shared settings and distributed as resource file.
Yeah, and that's what Hugo had mentioned earlier, right? Yeah.
Great. So why don't we move on to Sitecore CLI?
Yeah, it's another one of those three-letter acronyms, right? So this is command line interface. This is something that was released by Sitecore, I think, during Sitecore 10 release. The big line item here is that you can now create items as there's a new item and resource package plugin which allows you to create your own resource file. So this is what Hugo was talking about earlier with SXA, for example, being released as a resource file, which just makes those upgrades and things easier. You can now create a file for your own purposes, for your own solution. So it'll just make deployments and things a little bit easier. We've got a bit of experimentation that we've been doing with this, so we've got some good stuff coming out around this plugin, which will release soon. There's been some additions to the indexing plugin. Well, there is a new indexing plugin which will allow you to automate a bunch of things, such as deploying the schemas, creating indexes, kicking off indexing operations. So just good for the deployments and automation processes. Field exclusion. So when you're serializing those items, you can exclude certain fields from being included. Very technical, doesn't really matter, but for the tech team, this has been an important element. And role serialization just allows you to create roles and promote those up across the different environments without having to do those tasks manually.
Now, we spoke at the top about the macro levels of headless, and here we are at some of the actual callouts. I know we have headless rendering, we have headless forms. Let's dig in.
Yeah. So headless, say it was mentioned, you mentioned it 10 odd times in the release notes, and has been a heavy focus on headless. The big one to call out, I think, was being able to statically render MVC sites to HTML. And so what happens is, as we all know, Sitecore is very component-based in its nature. And if you have a traditional website which is built in MVC, you can take that MVC component and use the headless rendering engine to render this and push it out to the experience edge. And then that content can be consumed by a JSS-based website. And now JSS traditionally uses just the raw data, the JSON data. So you take the JSON data, you take the HTML, and you can now merge those together to build your end result. And this will allow you to incrementally move towards JSS and to a headless website. So you're not then having to lose all of that work that you've already done in MVC and having to do this big bang upgrade if you want to move to headless. So it's an interesting one. I think it could be useful as people transition over.
And there's not a exclamation point with that integration with Horizon, right?
There should be probably, right? But there was some integration with Horizon, I think, with the previous version. But now it has integration with Next.js as well, and we've been using Next.js internally a lot, right? We love using Next.js, so that integration with Horizon gives it a nice visual editor to compose your websites. I think the other thing to call out is Next.js has been upgraded in the headless to version 11, I think rather unfortunate timing, because in the Next.js conference just a couple of weeks back, they of course announced version 12. I'm sure Sitecore will be releasing an update for this fairly soon, but this is the nature of not being truly headless, right? If I was truly headless, I can just upgrade this, and I'm kind of done.
Can I ask I want to ask kind of a general question off of that. The one thing I feel with Composable DXP, looking from my vantage point, you are composing the best of breed from so many different places. Does that, and they're all having their own upgrades, right? Does that make your job as developers and solutions architects more difficult, or are you able to stay on these roadmaps for all the products you choose?
You mean in a fully composable
way?
stack, right?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't, because your solution is built against whatever version of the framework you're using, and it's up to you to decide when you make the upgrade and when you make the move. Usually there'll be compelling reasons to move, just because maybe it's some security fixes or some new features you want to take care of. But usually these frameworks have good upgrade paths as well, so upgrades can usually be fairly seamless, so you don't have to put as much effort into that process.
Interesting. Headless better be seamless, right?
Yeah.
So the next one, I know we have Headless Forms. Now, when we say the term forms, is this like marketing forms, or is this something that's more in the background? Are these actually like the front end forms that people fill in within websites?
Yes. So Sitecore has had a forms module since I can remember, right? It used to be web forms for marketers, and then they released Experience Forms. The problem with Experience Forms, it was very server based. It was for the traditional MVC type of approach for forms. They did release something with the headless module to act as a bridge, but it only worked with React. I think it was the only one that they had released, and some community members have Angular versions of that framework. So now Sitecore is fully supporting headless forms. It uses that feature we just talked about being able to take an MVC component and render that out to HTML. And this is essentially what it will do. So, a user requests a form, the rendering host will go to the layout service, generate some HTML, return the form to the user. It's then consumed by JSS to render out a form. And it works both ways, so you can both get the form and you can make the form submission as well. So it's just nicely building upon the feature they just released. So I think that's a nice bridge. And you still get all of the use of the Experience Forms builder, visual editor, for example, being able to have custom submit actions and custom integrations in the background.
Great. Well, you said the word experience, so now we move on to Experience Edge, and I really like this diagram. Can you talk us through it?
So the Experience Edge has actually been available on 10.1 as well. It's something that Sitecore released a few months ago. Since 10.1 was released, it's an add-on. And this is Sitecore's bridge to headless for customers on Sitecore XM. It's very, very much geared towards XM and not XP with its full customization capabilities. And the way it works is, you'd use your content management system to create your content, create the templates, compose the pages, and then you push all of that information out to the Experience Edge, and that data can then be consumed by your website. So whether that's JSS or just a plain old React application or a mobile application, it can all be consumed via the API as the headless API by whatever system you need. And it's the Experience Edge is pushed out to a content delivery network, which means that it can scale globally across into the different regions. That I'm not sure who they're using in the background. It's probably something like Akamai or something like that. So whatever those edge nodes they have, it can be scaled out to those. So you only need a content management system. You don't necessarily need content delivery nodes deployed in all the different regions.
And when they speak, I know we did Akshay and I did a discussion on the Next.js conference, and you hear the term on the edge a lot. Is this the same connotation?
Yeah, similar. Yeah, similar. It's being able to push whatever the content is, wherever the servers are, as close to the users as possible. So that's why when we say edge, that's what we mean. Just over the edge, essentially. And so that when a user requests a web page, you can deliver it to them as fast as possible. Traditionally, we would have our servers in one data center, maybe two, and then if we want to scale past those, there's a lot of effort involved in scaling that infrastructure, and a lot of cost that comes with that, right? So this is a way of reducing that. It's also I also feel it's like a bridge as well to that headless from your traditional system if you already have one built.
Yeah, whenever I hear it, I'm always like, is it the Lady Gaga Edge of Glory?
Is it the Tom Cruise Edge of Tomorrow, right? Yeah,
that's right. I will get to the server in Australia. So we left Sitecore Commerce for the end, but it is really interwoven with all of the things we've kind of been discussing, right? Because it's a big product for Sitecore, and there's kind of minor updates, there's some small improvements, but even I think Sitecore put out a blog when they were talking about commerce and how you could use the best of breed for like CMS. They said Contentful. For analytics, they said Google Analytics. So you talk about bridge as well. Sitecore Commerce really feels like it's on some kind of bridge as well, right?
It almost feels like it's on life support at the moment, right? There's not much in here. Item resources, like Hugo mentioned, everything is moving towards that thing. In the scheme of things, it's very, very minor. Some container improvements, again, fairly minor. Compatibility fixes, really. I don't see any. Again, kind of like XP, there doesn't seem to be any big ticket updates to this as you would expect. And given the changes or the lack of changes we're seeing in XP, the lack of changes and updates we're seeing in commerce, the heavy focus towards headless, or the bridge to headless at least, it kind of does speak to the direction that Sitecore really thinks that the whole industry is moving towards, I think.
Great. Hugo, we started off with a bang with you, and then we lost you a little bit here, not because you've done anything wrong, but it was we did a lot of the search earlier. Are there any other thoughts that you have from this? Any final thoughts?
I mean, I've played a little bit with the 10.2 real quickly, the XP one. Basically installed that myself using Sif. So the good news is that it is exactly the same way that you guys already use it to. Pretty simple. Actually, the script is exactly the same with a few minor changes to adapt to the new version of Solr, for instance. So that's a good thing. No breaking changes from that perspective. But that's pretty much the experience that I have with it. Looks like it is a good thing. A lot of good news about headless. Cam is the real specialist here, so I'm gonna trust him. But yeah, that's in general that was a good one.
Yeah. The installation was fairly seamless. We'll be updating our Docker repo with examples that people want to go in and have a play around with 10.2. It's and Horizon, and I know it's a pain to install in a regular kind of way. So we'll update that repo shortly, and then people can play around with that. But yeah, it's a good release for headless, or should I say the bridge to headless. I think given previous releases, I know technically this is a minor release, but Sitecore has never regarded point releases as being minor. I'm a bit surprised, but also not surprised at the kind of direction that they're taking and the contents of this update. There's some good things in there for SXA customers, particularly, I'd say.
Yeah, it's a evolution of where we're seeing a lot of our clients going and the industry. And of course, we'll take a moment to promote that if anybody would like to talk with the experts about how to go composable, go to conabos.com. Cam and Hugo, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Matt.
guys. All right.